I think the biggest risk is not AI in and of itself, even though there's lots in the media and press written about that. It's that people won't evolve fast enough with AI. It's the human risk and ability to actually start to really use these new tools and build the habit. At the same time, I'm incredibly optimistic because I think I have lived in the heart of these changes in work for the past, 5+ years now with some level of intensity, right? Like lived it and breathed it every day. And what I think I'm always very hopeful and surprised by is the ability of humans to continue to adapt and be resilient and find ways to move through the change. And that's what I've seen time and time again, both, in my own lived experience and through the data and how we've studied this.
From empty offices in 2020 to AI colleagues in 2025, the way that we work has been completely rewired over the past 5 years. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. I'm here in Redmond this week. Our guest studies these shifts closely along with her colleagues at Microsoft. Colette Stahlbaumer is the co-founder of Microsoft WorkLab, the general manager of Microsoft 365 Copilot, and the author of the new book, WorkLab, 5 Years That Shook the Business World and Sparked an AI-First Future, from Microsoft's 80/80 Books. Colette, it's great to have you here on the show.
Todd, thank you so much for having me.
So I've been really enjoying this book. I have to tell you, it's given me kind of a combination of nostalgia and PTSD because it's an anthology, really, and it spans the time from the pandemic to the AI revolution. And one of the things that it makes very clear is that this is all one big interconnected story. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that? How did the pandemic and what we all went through in that era set the stage for what we're experiencing now with the AI revolution?
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of wild to look at the 5 years in one container, right? Just to look back at that time period and where we find ourselves today. And I think if I had to describe it in a word, the word would be change. And just the pace of change and the clock speed that we've all experienced. And that's what's been so great about WorkLab and the Work Trend Index, where we sort of study this change happening in real time.
Are there things from a technical standpoint that would not be possible today if not for the habits that we created back then? I'm thinking like transcripts of meetings and those types of things. Are you seeing now those kinds of things provide the underpinnings for what we're experiencing with AI?
Absolutely. I really do believe in hindsight, and we see this in our data too, that the changes we all experienced during the pandemic, from remote work to hybrid and flexible work overnight to then now where, there's still flexibility, but also a lot of return to office kind of for at least part of the time type of policies where companies are going. All of that, I think, prepared us for where we are now with AI. And, take Teams, which in some ways during the pandemic went from a new fledgling product to now what is sort of the de facto enterprise standard for how you do work. And all of us being able to collaborate using Teams and using tools like Teams over video, that didn't exist 5 years ago. It's pretty wild to think that we didn't work that way at all.
One thing that strikes me, Colette, as I'm thinking big picture about this 5 years is, and as I was reading the book too, it was just like this notion of rebuilding connection. Mm-hmm. You write about people missing their work friends at the very beginning, and we were separated by the pandemic, and now some of our interactions are being replaced by AI. I mean, part of the lesson of the book is talk to the AI as if it were a colleague.
That's right.
And implicit in that is the fact that it's not a human colleague, right? How do you think we can recreate human connection in all of this? Is there an opportunity for some of that? And what are the risks if we can't?
Yeah, I love this question. I mean, I think human connection is still number one. It's like we're adapting and learning how to use these new tools every day at work. And AI is table stakes. If you're a business today and you're not helping your people learn how to use these tools or even making them the heart of your business model, your operating heartbeat, I just think you might not be around in a few years, right?
Right.
You'll be disrupted by a company who is.
You almost have no choice.
That's right. But at the same time, we, as humans, we have to adapt. We have to learn how to use these new tools. but I still show up every day at Microsoft because of the people I work with. And that remains number one. So we're all learning to work in new ways, but I absolutely believe people are the heart of work.
Sometimes the work and the load of the work will keep me from being my best self, and that's a very charitable way of putting it, with the people around me at home and in the workplace. And so my hope in some ways, and maybe this is being Pollyannish and overly optimistic, but it's like if in fact AI can get rid of that grunt work.
That's right. The digital debt, as we called it.
The digital, another phrase.
Yes, another phrase.
You should put these up on a wall. But part of my hope is that, maybe it'll make me a better human in the process. And again, maybe George Orwell was writing about me way back in the day, and I'm just completely naive here. And I want to acknowledge that. But that's sort of where I go with all of this.
That's exactly right. I have a lot of hope. I'm on a task force at my daughter's high school right now, looking at how should they be using AI. Just like there were digital natives, now our kids will be AI natives. But again, I think human ingenuity, the entrepreneurial spirit, it still takes that spark and that seed of creativity. And then when you combine it with these tools, that's where I think I have a lot of hope and optimism for what people are going to be able to do and invent in the future.
In many ways, 2025 was supposed to be the year of the agent. First off, do you think that that's actually happened to the extent that people thought?
Well, I think what's happened is business leaders certainly have woken up to the fact that agents can be that path to ROI, right? Okay, so figuring out how to automate certain processes, what you talked about, right? The drudgery of work, the jobs that frankly do not give humans a lot of joy, right? A lot of that work can be automated away with agents, freeing people to actually spend more time on the next big idea.
Let's take a step back here because you're in a unique position at Microsoft in the Work Lab group and the research that you do. And Microsoft, because of its products, its customers, has a window into the world of the workplace and productivity that a lot of other companies or organizations don't have. Just as a starting point, can you tell us about your job?
Yes, absolutely. So before I was in the role I'm in now, I was actually Satya Nadella's speechwriter. And Work Lab and the Work Trend Index were born out of a conversation that he and I actually had around the fact that for Microsoft, right, I mean, we are productivity is our DNA, right? It runs deep. And we obviously, we birthed Office and these amazing products, Excel, Word, PowerPoint that people love and use today. And we were talking about the fact that obviously we had great technology and we had great product marketing, but there was sort of this gap in the marketplace for Microsoft to actually help our customers really understand how work was changing and use all of our data, bring all of our research to bear on really studying that problem deeply and then helping customers understand what was happening in real time. We were already doing tons of research, of course, right? We have amazing, brilliant scientists and researchers around the world, but we hadn't yet looked sort of left to right at that. And so we began to do that. Then the pandemic happened, and that's how Work Lab was born.
Yeah, you describe this in the book, I think in the introduction, this whole notion that you've been having these conversations, but the shift to remote work really accelerated the need to understand what was happening because the definition of the workplace had been completely upended literally overnight.
Literally overnight. Yes, it changed overnight, and then all of a sudden customers were turning to us saying, what do we do? Like, how do we keep the doors open? How do we keep business flowing? How do we deal with supply chain issues? And so that really was the impetus. And actually, it's a funny story. We did one small survey to kind of ask people how they were feeling about work during that time and what was happening, and published a blog, actually. And we got such a response from people being seen, of kind of, at that time, what was a lot of fear and uncertainty and real challenges for business leaders and employees alike. And that kind of was the spark that lit the fire.
Can you give a sense for when you're doing the Work Trend Index, the annual index in particular, like the kinds of data and the inputs that you're able to take in and analyze to come up with the conclusions you reach?
Yeah, if we look back just at the 5 years, we've talked to like 150,000 voices, which is a pretty incredible body of work on work, as it were.
Yeah.
But it's because of the unique position that you mentioned that Microsoft is in, right? We have telemetry where we actually understand how people are using our products day in and day out. How are they using them to get work done? And then we sort of combined that with our own first-party research where we surveyed people. Sometimes we're talking to, for any given work trend index, 30,000 people in 30 countries, and to understand where are people at, how are they feeling about things. And then, of course, because we have the LinkedIn economic graph, we can tell what's happening with jobs. So all of that gives us this really rich tapestry from which to actually study the insights and the data and be really data-driven about what's going on in the world. Help people make sense of it. It's really, it's sense-making.
I want to fast forward to today, and we'll sort of fill in the gaps as we go. But one of the things that really stuck with me in reading this anthology of the Work Lab's writings and posts over the past 5 years was the notion that future teams will look a lot like Hollywood studios. That really resonated with me because I think everybody can have a sense for how ad hoc those teams are and yet how defined the roles are within those teams. Can you talk us through that whole concept and what that says about the future of work?
Yeah, Todd, the thing you're talking about there is actually what we call the Hollywood model. And it's this idea that with AI, everything has gotten more fluid. And so, people are not as really hard-coded into specific roles today, even as they once were. So you have to have a lot of agility. And what we're seeing is this movement in teams, and we're doing this in my team too, where we'll stand up a small squad of people who bring their own domain expertise, but also have AI added into the mix. They come together just like you would do to produce a film, right? A group of people comes together to produce a blockbuster. And then you sort of disperse and go back to your day job. And so there's this notion of how that's actually kind of changing work patterns. And we're practicing this on my own team and at Microsoft and kind of learning how, because AI democratizes skills and expertise, people can be a lot more fluid. And I think this is something we're going to see a lot more of.
And one of the things that this really brings up is this shift toward agents, because as you mentioned, agents are going to be part of this mix as you think about this Hollywood-style team coming in to tackle a problem. So I want to talk about that and really get into this new world of agents when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm on location in Redmond this week. My guest is Colette Stahlbaumer. She is the co-founder of Microsoft Work Lab, the general manager of Microsoft 365 Copilot. She is the author of the new book, Work Lab, 5 Years That Shook the Business World and Sparked an AI-First Future. So Colette, combining a few different things that you talked about in the book, you talked about the spectrum of users. Like, I would like to at least think that I'm on the power user, but I have not yet really been able to get myself into the world of AI agents. So I'm wondering, in part, as something that might be instructive for me and others out there who are in a similar position, like, where are people starting? What are you seeing in terms of how companies are getting going on agents? Because some of the case studies you had in the book were interesting from Dow and others. Like, give me a sense for the entry point for the world of agents as you're seeing it.
Yeah, and maybe even what is this thing,
yes,
right? What
exactly.
is one? What is an agent? I mean, an agent is really just an AI tool that has increasingly autonomous capabilities, if you will, on a spectrum, right? So there's still a person that has to tell that agent what to do and assign it tasks and work. But increasingly what we're seeing with these agents is they have capability to take on more and more of your work. So I'll give you an example from my own team. I have a data analyst on my team who actually works on Work Lab. And so, he's using 3 agents kind of at any given time to outsource certain parts of his job with tasks. So, he's got an agent that's constantly analyzing looking for new research, on the hunt for new research, scanning websites, looking internally. We publish lots of papers at Microsoft. It's a big company, so trying to scan for new research. Then there's a second agent that he uses to sort of pull out insights from that research. and then a third agent that's writing it up, right? Writing recaps and reports. So that's just a really good concrete example that people can get their arms around. And so what I like to kind of say and what I talk to customers about is, there are Alexes in every company. You kind of just have to find them. And it's what you said. They're the early adopters. They're the power users, right, that are super kind of excited and proud to put on their agent boss hat. And that, I think, these folks are lighting the path for others. They're the tipping point.
And as I said, the case studies in the book are really interesting. One of them that resonated with me was how Dow set up a process where there was an agent that monitored incoming emails on specific accounts to look for contracts and then analyze spending and costs. And it was something that was actually meaningful to them in terms of their bottom line.
That's right. You take a company like Dow for whom shipping and logistics and getting product places is a huge multi-billion-dollar line item. And so they're using a couple of agents to and invoicing logistics. So they're using agents to actually find anomalies in their invoicing, and all of those little errors add up to big savings. And so that's how they're using agents and, actually showing that this type of use of AI, these new types of uses, can actually drive real ROI to the bottom line.
Looking at the current moment and all the AI research that you and your team have been doing over the past, 6 months to a year or more, do you have a favorite finding from your more recent research into AI and productivity? Is there something that really stands out to you as illustrative of this moment and the way that we're working today and may work in the future?
Yeah, I think it would have to be around this most recent work trend index that we published, and something that we said, which is 2025 is the year of the frontier firm. Okay, so what is a frontier firm? So a frontier firm may be a startup type of company, or it may be an older, more traditional enterprise, but they're disrupting themselves. And how they're doing that is they're not kind of adding AI as an ingredient. AI is the business model.
Right.
Okay, so it's the core. And these frontier firms can have a small number of people using AI in this way, generating pretty high run rate, right? So it's a whole new way to think about shipping, creating, innovating, shipping products, serving customers, et cetera. It is the whole operating model. And in our last Work Trend Index, we found that people who are working in these frontier firms, as we call them, actually are more satisfied at work. They are more optimistic about AI and their jobs and their future, and they have higher work satisfaction. So then folks that we talk to who are not working in this new way. So I thought that was a really interesting finding and kind of a glimpse of the future.
It's an optimistic book. And I guess you would maybe expect nothing less from Microsoft and one of the somebody in the
purveyors
middle
of technology.
Exactly,
yes.
I guess. And so I wonder, obviously there's impacts on jobs, and you talk about the shift in the labor market. I think the way that you present it, I walked away feeling much better about things personally. But was there or is there a finding in your recent research that concerns you, something that's maybe a red flag that you're going to be keeping an eye on or tracking in future data as something that might not be as rosy of an outcome?
I mean, maybe not a specific finding, though we have lots of data points on how people are feeling about AI and the fears around AI. But maybe what I would say is I think the biggest risk is not AI in and of itself, even though there's lots in the media and press written about that. It's that people won't evolve fast enough with AI. It's the human risk and ability to actually start to really use these new tools and build the habit. At the same time, I'm incredibly optimistic because I think I have lived in the heart of these changes in work for the past, 5+ years now with some level of intensity, right? Like lived it and breathed it every day. And what I think I'm always very hopeful and surprised by is the ability of humans to continue to adapt and be resilient and find ways to move through the change. And that's what I've seen time and time again, both, in my own lived experience and through the data and how we've studied this.
Well, that's interesting in terms of the corporate experience, the organizational experience, and I think one of the additional wrinkles and aspects that your research brings to all of this is the personal experience. And
yes.
I think a lot of the ways that I've really related to the data that you've presented over the years are things that you've come out with, like the infinite workday and all sorts of other things like that. Can you talk about how you've given names and labels in some cases to the things that we're all experiencing and sort of reflect on the past 5 years in terms of the evolution of the trends that you've seen in that way?
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, that has been one of the most powerful things about WorkLab and the Work Trend Index is that we haven't just studied work and how it's changing, we've put names to it. And when we've done that each time, I think we've been really also surprised and delighted by how that's resonated with people. Productivity paranoia. That was a term that we coined, yes.
And I'm trying to remember, that was when people were remote and the bosses were concerned that they weren't actually working.
That's exactly right.
But
that's exactly right.
When in fact we were all just at our computers all day. Nobody was down doing the laundry.
That's right. Yeah. Well, maybe a few trips to the laundry.
Yes.
But no, that's exactly right. We had this finding in the data that showed that leaders were super concerned and thinking that people weren't working, as you said, and employees were saying, "What do you mean? I'm working all the time." And so we saw this gap in the data. And we coined a term out of that called productivity paranoia. And it really resonated with people. It struck at the heart of what they were feeling at that time. And every time we've managed to do that, it has shown us that when you can actually tap into what people are feeling through data, it really resonates with them. They feel seen.
Right.
And we did it with productivity paranoia. I think we did it again with the triple peak workday, which was another term that we coined around that time that showed that when our data showed that people were actually logging off sort of at, maybe when their kids were getting home from school or around the tail end of the afternoon, but then they were logging back on in the evening to do more work. And there was sort of this third piece of the workday that hadn't really been discovered. And some of these things have really stood the test of time and have been very sticky. And if you go out and you bing, triple peak or productivity paranoia or infinite workday or any of the others, you'll see, they come up in lots of places. They became part of the cultural vernacular.
And one of the more recent ones, too, is this notion of agent bosses. How do you expect that to reshape the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's so much discussion of, well, frankly, how AI will reshape the workforce. I do find that we're sort of moving through a lot of the initial fear. And now people are getting serious about, okay, how do I really use these tools to help me do my job better? We saw in the data this year, for example, in our latest report that whereas a year ago, employees were kind of leading the way and experimenting with AI, and business leaders were having to sort of catch up with that. Now it's flipped. Now, a stat from our most recent report says that 82% of the business leaders we spoke to say that 2025 is the year that they're getting really serious about rethinking strategy and operations and their company around AI. So getting back to your point around Agent Boss, I think what we find is that it really does require a mindset shift and a habit shift and unlearning some things and working in a new way. And in the pandemic, we had sort of this tailwind of a global crisis, right, to sort of force us overnight to work in new ways. With AI, it's a little bit different. And so Agent Boss is one way of saying, hey, if you don't start to build that habit of using AI every day, you're never going to get to be an Agent Boss, right? And so it's kind of something to aspire to.
There's so much motivation in this book for people to embrace AI if they're not already doing it at work or even accelerate their use of AI. And one is in this notion that if you do embrace it, that there are going to be jobs for you personally in the future.
Right.
But then on the personal productivity point, I mean, some of the surveys that you've done have shown real impact from people who have been power users and really looking to adopt this. And one of the things that stood out to me from one of the articles in the anthology was the habits of people who are power users and this notion of looking for ways when they get into a problem, the first thing they think about is, hey, how am I going to use AI or how could I use AI to make this problem easier for me to solve?
That's exactly right. You have to kind of retrain your brain to have that be the first question, right? Before you start any task or project at work, what parts of this can I outsource to AI? What parts of this can AI help me with? Even in writing the work trend index report, my team, the entire team, uses AI Copilot as a thought partner. We use it at every stage of that work stream. So we're using it up front to help us brainstorm survey questions, okay? And then when we get the data back, we're cutting weeks out of our process by using Copilot to actually analyze and pull out the first wave of insights. And then when we get to time to write the report, we're using it as a co-writer, if you will, to write the report. And so it really is about, I kind of like to think of it like this, like habit building and change of adopting AI happens at many different levels, but it also happens one project and one team at a time.
That gets to another thing that really stood out to me, and that was this notion of treating the AI like a colleague or a collaborator, not a calculator.
Right.
That really stood out to me because I think in a lot of cases when people are first getting started with AI, they just think of it as this machine. And of course, it is a machine.
It's a tool.
It's a tool, but they think of it more like a magic wand. And I'll say one thing, and then suddenly the problem will be solved in response. But it's much more of a back and forth, and you have to really think about how you're interacting over time in succession with this AI.
You do. You have to build the habit and build the muscle to work in this new way and have that moment of, oh, wait, I don't actually need to do this. I could actually turn to Copilot or another AI tool or quickly create an agent. Or, we have something called Researcher now that's like having a full, PhD researcher on your team that you can ask to write 20-page papers. But it takes practice.
All right, so that's some of the personal productivity story of all of this. I want to talk when we come back about how companies are successfully implementing AI and what you're seeing in the data from that. That's coming up next. You're listening to GeekWire, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm speaking this week with Colette Stahlbaumer. She is the author of the new book, Work Lab, 5 Years That Shook the Business World and Sparked an AI-First Future. It's out October 21st from Microsoft's 80/80 Books. So, Colette, as you're studying this data and you're looking at companies that are implementing AI successfully, are there certain traits or characteristics or habits at the corporate level or the leadership level or even the employee level that are common among the ones that are doing it well?
Yes. I have a lot to say about this, and we're learning a lot. So I think the first thing is the idea that you just need to have an AI strategy is a bit of a fallacy. Really, you kind of want to start with the business problem and then apply AI. Another way I like to think about this is sort of push toward the polls. In every company, you have where are you spending the most and where do you have the biggest challenges. Those are great areas to actually think about putting AI to work for you, finding efficiencies. On the other end of the spectrum, where are your greatest opportunities? Where, if you don't innovate, are you going to be disrupted by your biggest competitor? Where do you need a competitive edge? And that's another great way to think about how do you start using AI. And then what I would say is what we have found, definitely from partnering with our customers is that you have to activate at every level of the organization. Okay, you have to sort of have a tops-down leadership, call it mandate, or at least, a lot of focus and communication on the importance of learning to use these new tools and work in a new way. And then second, you really have to empower your business line leaders and have real goals and real KPIs for how are they bringing AI into those parts of the organization, how are they driving progress on specific projects or work streams. And then lastly, of course, grassroots efforts. We talked about the Alexes, right? Find those people who are the early adopters and the power users.
One thing that struck me from the book was the fact that leaders are really under pressure or pressuring their organizations in some cases for a quick return on investment from AI. But many of the benefits are less tangible, like making work more enjoyable or creative. I mean, that's some of the benefit of this, the positive aspects for people who adopt AI. How should leaders measure and justify the investment in these kinds of crucial but, softer benefits?
Yeah. I mean, I think right now there's two kinds of companies in a way. There are companies who know that if they don't get after this, they're not going to be around tomorrow,
Yeah.
and that it's just not an option to sit on the sidelines. And the very, the forward-thinking, whether it's CEOs or IT leaders, CIOs that I talk to, really deeply understand that. And then there's another kind of company who may be taking more of a wait-and-see approach, or they may be treating AI like a traditional technology adoption. And that's, I think, a risky thing to do right now, given what we see, how fast we see this technology maturing and what AI is capable of. Just to give you an example of, again, how fast things are changing and how fast we have to adapt with it. When we did the Work Trend Index, when sort of we were in the first year of AI, we were really looking about, everybody wanted, like, give me productivity time savings, okay? Prove that this saves time. And within about 6 months of studying that, we'd proven it. And so, and that was such a rapid pace. Yeah. And then we kind of got to that demarcation point, and customers were telling us, okay, that's great, but that's not enough, And so we had to quickly move on to look at the next level of what you're bringing up, which is how do companies actually measure the ROI of this? And it does go beyond time savings. And now I think we're getting much more sophisticated at looking at sort of specific tasks, specific workflows and processes, specific functions. So we talked about one earlier with supply chain logistics and invoicing. You could take customer service as another example of that. And it's not about replacing humans, but really looking at those workflows end to end and saying, where can AI or agents come in to actually take cost out of the business and improve customer service, for example?
So I'm thinking about safeguards as we're talking about all of this, and just to share a couple of personal experiences, the places where I've run into some potential pitfalls that I've, fortunately avoided, there's two. One is putting a transcript of a conversation like this through something like, it hasn't happened on Copilot, it's happened on ChatGPT, especially earlier versions. I found Gemini to be especially accurate, but the hallucination of direct quotes is a concern. I've also done a little bit of vibe coding, our GeekWire 200 index.
We just started talking about vibe working.
Yes, exactly. This is the next big thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So vibe coding, and it's been interesting. We did our GeekWire 200 index, and it was a nice isolated project on a single web page on the site. And it's funny, like just version control, simple things that wouldn't be in most, IDEs, it's just not there if you're doing it sort of freehand in some ways, freestyle. So I'm curious, like as you're studying these things, are there ways that you're seeing companies adapt to this kind of new frontier in ways that, preserve those safeguards for security and all sorts of other things? Like what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, I think it's a really important consideration. And for us as Microsoft, not an afterthought. That's just, for us, security is first class, and that's kind of the approach we've always taken. That's why customers trust us with their data and their proprietary information. And so in many ways, AI is no different. You really have to look at what are the safeguards that are in place, and are they built into the product as a first class thing, or are they an afterthought? And so I think that's our approach. Security, compliance, those things are privacy, those things are paramount to us. That's why our customers come to Microsoft, frankly, for a tool like Copilot, where all of those things are in place.
So just big picture, taking this full circle, you were able to go back and look at these past 5 years anew in many ways. And it strikes me, sometimes when you get into that mode of reflection and compiling this anthology of a lot of the work that was done, you might have new insights and see new things that you might not have seen in the moment. Did anything come up for you that was crystallized through this process that might even shed light on it for the rest of us as well?
Yes, I think the biggest reflection for me is I think throughout every inflection point in change, and again, we've seen more change in the past 5 years than in the prior 100, right, when it comes to work since the turn of the century. And I think there's been oftentimes this feeling of, well, we'll just get through this and then we'll return to normal, right? And that sense of, that definitely happened for a time there when we were in the flexible and hybrid work phase of like, we're going to come out of this, it's just going to go back to normal. And I think what, for me, has really struck home is the new normal is the constant change, is the ability to be adaptable and flexible and learn, right? And continually learn what the new way of working is, what the new tools are. And again, I think that gives me a lot of hope and optimism because I've just seen the resilience of the human spirit through every one of these changes.
And you see it in the data.
And you see it in the data. Yes, exactly.
Well, Colette, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Todd.
Colette Stahlbaumer is the co-founder of Microsoft Work Lab, general manager at Microsoft 365 Copilot, and the author of the new book, Work Lab, 5 Years That Shook the Business World and Sparked an AI-First Future, from Microsoft's 80/80 books. Thanks for listening. Curt Milton edited this episode. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.